Welcome to Legal Resources Radio, where we invite you into the world of social justice, advocacy, and public interest law. Throughout this podcast series, we'll share stories, insights, and expert advice from our dedicated team at the Legal Resources Centre, as well as from our valued guests. In each episode, we'll dive into the legal landscape, tackle pressing social issues, and aim to empower you with the knowledge to make a difference. Whether you're a community activist, a legal professional, passionate about social justice, or just curious, this is the place for you. So wherever you are, washing dishes, at work, on the bus, train, or plane, or just relaxing at home, plug in your headphones, take a deep breath, and get ready to begin.
Ever feel like that sponsored advert on your feed seems a little too tailored to your specific needs? Do you think your phone is listening to you? Well, might not be that simple. What we've found is the way you interact with posts, the way you like them, the way you comment them, the amount of time that you spend on them, well, that creates what's known as a data profile. Basically a piece of information that tells the internet who you are. Advertisers are then able to use that data to specifically target market you for whatever reason that they might feel. So when you see that exact thing that you want to get your partner for Christmas online, well, that's how they knew how to advertise you for that. But that's not such a big issue. The issue comes a few months ago when we were voting. Political parties or political agents or any kind of political candidate has the same access to that kind of information, and they can target market you for their political campaigns. Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. And I'm joined by two amazing people to talk about their political microtargeting report that they wrote for the African Internet Rights Alliance collective, of which the Legal Resources Centre is a part of. First, we have my colleague from the Legal Resources Centre, Dr. Charlene Kreuser. I'm a big fan of hers. And then we're also joined online from Kenya by Joseph Theuri. He is a lead data scientist at Strathmore University, and when he was writing the report, he did it for the Centre for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law. He is now working at the iLab Africa at the same university. I'm really excited to be joined by them. Charlene, hello.
Hi.
How are you?
It's December. I'm hanging on by a thread. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I want to add that there were 3 other amazing individuals that contributed to this report. So from the Legal Resources Centre, we have our colleagues Kiara Govender and Mlamli Chulu. And from CIPIT at Strathmore University, we also had Joshua Katili joining us.
Speaking of CIPIT, Joseph, also hello. I know you're very far away. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
So, Charlene, I'm going to come to you first. Now, imagine that I know absolutely nothing. Imagine that I don't sit across from you every single day in this office that we work in together in Cape Town. And then please proceed to educate me on this report that you have written with the colleagues from IRA. What is social media ad tech?
So social media advertising technology essentially refers to all the behind-the-scenes technology that powers the ads that we see on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, and on other platforms. So it's the tools and the systems that enable businesses, organizations, and individuals to create, deliver, and optimize their ads on social media platforms.
And then, essentially the second part of what your report says is that it's micro-targeting.
Yes.
And that's related to the ad tech?
Yes. So we can't really separate social media advertising technology from micro-targeting. So platforms like social media and search engines collect information about us, their users. So this includes things like location, age, our browsing history, our likes, and our purchases. So micro-targeting is a strategy that advertisers use where they analyze our information and we are then grouped with others who appear to be similar. So it's about using personal data to maximize the impact of your communication. So essentially ensuring that the right people see the right message at the right time. And I can really use me as an example. So I'm in my early 30s I recently started running, and I will hopefully still be running by the time anyone listens to this podcast.
You've yet to invite me for a run, I might remind you.
Yes, but I'm very slow. So I have engaged with running content online, specifically running for slow people. And my most recent purchase was a hydration vest. So now let's say there's an app and they want to help people reach their running goals, regardless of the age, the distance, the pace, any other sort of limitations or your ability. Based on the content that I have engaged in online and my recent purchase, I would likely be shown this ad because I'm the right person to receive the right message at this time.
So when I was looking for a Christmas present for my partner, and I then bought that Christmas present,
Yes.
and now my social media wants me to buy more of that same Christmas present,
Yes.
that's micro-targeting.
Yes.
Okay. So the most important part about this report, at least I believe, is that it's not just simply micro-targeting. I think I said at the top that micro-targeting for, buying a Christmas present might not be necessarily such a bad thing. Advertisers want us to be able to buy things that we like. And what we do on social media kind of, represents that. But this report is about political micro-targeting, which is a completely different thing and slightly more insidious. What is that?
So political micro-targeting is sort of in the phrase. So these are ads that are...
Remember, I'm dumb and you're educating.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. So it's ads of a political nature where people are grouped based on potentially being aligned on a specific issue. So it's not so much about who posts the ad, but on what it is about. So is it about mobilizing supporters? Is it about getting donations, like the famous Bernie Sanders approach? Or is it about aligning people on issues? So let's say there's a political party that wants to encourage people to vote on an issue like, let's say, reducing tax or tax cuts for people who use solar energy in cities. They can then ensure that individuals that live in an urban area get shown this ad, as well as look at and say, are there people who are, let's say, appear to be environmentally conscious based on their behavior? Are they in a city? Let's say they assume that it's mostly young people that are passionate about this issue. They can make sure that that group of people, or like a group of people that have those characteristics and online behaviors, that they see those ads. And that would be to encourage them to vote for this political party based on a particular issue.
Ooh, okay. I think I've got my head around this now. Joseph, I'm going to bring this to you now. Your side of the report was the computational analysis. So you essentially collected the data, what I believe was from the Facebook ad library. You then, took all that data, analyzed it, and then separated into two groups, I think it was. One was a group of sort of generalized adverts, just everyday things that we see. There was no sort of specific nature to it, as Charlene had mentioned. There was no micro-targeting. And the other group of adverts were the micro-targeting ads. Can you tell me a little bit about that process, how that was done?
Yeah. So when we're looking at micro-targeting, we're trying to find the advertisements that are tailored for the different listeners. The idea, of course, behind micro-targeting is we're trying to sell a specific message to a specific demographic of users, so that it's appealing to them. We want them to remain engaged. We want them to buy into the idea. And so what we did with our study was we went into the Facebook ad library and downloaded the data that they have publicly available. And so the methodology we used was we applied a machine learning algorithm, basically to try and look into the data and try to understand the structure of the data. And the way it works is it separates the data into two. So the algorithm looks at the data, and then from the data, it's able to model the normal distribution of the data. Hereby, normal distribution is it tries to find out what do normal general ads look like, because we expect the assumption that we made is that these ads are generally the same. It's just a message that's put out there for the general public to consume information. But then after it models the normal information, what the algorithm does is it tries to find, so it kind of like draws a circle, so to say, this is the region of normal advertisements. And then tries to find those bits of advertisements that lie outside that normal distribution. And so those are the ads that we will say, hey, these ads are not the same as the general ads. They have something within them. And so to make sure that we were trying to find the micro-targeted ads, we made sure to extract specific elements from these advertisements, because within a targeted ad, we're looking for a very specific message. So before we actually embarked on the separation, we went and looked at what are the topics that are found within each of the specific message. Are there specific themes? Because in a micro-targeted message, you're selling a specific message, right? So we looked at that and we said, let's extract the specific themes from each message. And then let's go further and see, are these ads targeting a specific demographic? So is it a specific age group? Is it a specific region, for example, the geographic location? So we're able to extract different features or characteristics from these ads and then give it to the algorithm. And then the algorithm was then applied to the data, and then it was able to actually separate these two groups. And in the end, we found that 18% of the advertisements actually had these characteristics that were deviating from the norm.
Okay, so you talk about the data that you extrapolated out of the Facebook library. Was that just simply the adverts that you see every day on Facebook? It's just like all adverts that were used in the past on Facebook? Or was it also our personal data?
So it was the ads that had been posted. So from the time when campaign period began until just the day before the election, that advertising data is usually publicly available. It's posted every day. So we extracted that and we used it. And so we can't. Generally, you don't have access to the personal user information, because then also on the advertiser side, they have three options that they can use. They can either provide personal identifiable data, or they can look for lookalike audiences. So basically give some information about some people, and then it finds lookalike audiences. And then the third way that advertisers reach people is through attribute-based advertising. So they say, hey, they're looking for a demographic of maybe between 18 and 20. And so on their side, yes, they can supply it, but on our side, on the research service side, what we're able to see is what the ad was talking about, how much they spent, who did it reach, how many impressions did it make out there, what locations was it popular in, etc.
Okay, so just one short follow-up, Joseph. The thing that always strikes me when we talk about, the data online, I always go back to this Cambridge Analytica thing that happened in the US, the United States, and the United Kingdom. So obviously with the 2016 Trump campaign, we saw that data harvesting and political microtargeting was exceptionally successful there. And then with the 2020 United Kingdom Brexit referendum, again, another example. Do we see that as often here in South Africa or in Africa in general?
Yes, definitely. We could find campaigns that were very specific and that were targeted. So within the data, you could actually see specific campaigns that were being run at specific times for specific demographics of users, selling a specific message. And that's what micro-targeting is. And we could see that. And even one of the major findings was specifically for the micro-targeted ads, we could see a lot higher impressions coming up. Because, of course, these messages appeal to the people who are actually receiving them. And so they spend a lot more time digesting this information. And so one of the things is micro-targeting is there. Even from the previous studies, what we've seen is that it is actually something that is being done, but not at a large scale, as compared to other countries, probably the West. One of the likely reasons why that's not happening the same way is availability of data. Because for you to create a really good micro-targeted ad, you need to be able, one, to get personal information about specific people or certain attributes about people. And then you also need to know the messaging about them. So we could say that the political class might know what some demographics might want, but then there's the issue of the data and ideologies of different people. Because if I want to know what for example, what matters to you is maybe security and employment, and for somebody else, what matters to them is health and education, right? Some of those discourse can be gotten specifically, I know, from social media engagement. These days, social media is very active. So you can see what people are posting out there. You can say, okay, this person is more predisposed to education. And that's what happened with Cambridge Analytica. They had access to information about what people were posting. So if it was possible for an individual or a data scientist like myself to actually get a hold of information about what people are commenting on, what people are liking, I could actually create profiles as to what messages would appeal to you the most, because then I can see, based on your historical engagements, you're more drawn to these topics, or you're more drawn to issues of governance, for example. For example, governance came out as a very big issue that was there. And so I create tailored messages that I appeal to the governance side of you. I could even go further and look at, for example, the sentiments. How were you actually reacting to these messages? Were you angry? Were you happy? Were you excited? And so based on the emotions that I see you coming up with and the topics, I can then curate something that will keep you excited, to keep you, engaged with this content, make the candidate more appealing to you. And so if data was available, I think it could be something that is more prevalent. But I guess one of the bigger issues is access to data. And that's probably why we're not seeing too much of it. But in cases where some people actually have access to this data, we are seeing campaigns that are run specifically targeted towards specific groups of people.
So it went much deeper than separating them. When you mentioned slightly there about the governance topic, right? Let's take it back for a second. What other kind of topics of the adverts were you able to identify? Like what were people trying to, or I suppose what were political campaigns trying to target market? What was the topics of the adverts? And then could you identify specific groups that those adverts were pushed against?
Yeah. So within the study, we were able to identify 4 main themes within the data. It was very interesting that 2 of those themes were dominated by political parties, right? So we could see a distinct topic that was revolving around ANC, and it was talking about leadership, and then topics that were related to the manifesto, right? And as well, even the algorithm was also able to separate the topics that were related to DA, which were also very prevalent within the social media space. So those were 2 distinct topics where we could see the political class actually dominating and selling their messages. And then the other 2 were around environmental and there were environmental issues. And then there was one more topic where I did to look into that. But basically, we were able to find the four main topics that were in there. They had very specific messaging within them. There were subgroups. So we did do a bit more analysis and separate them into subgroups. And we could see, for example, ANC came out with issues on leadership and other subtopics that were within it. And so those 4 topics were very clear within the data, and the algorithm was able to separate them and group them into those 4 topics. Yeah.
One of the things that I saw in the report was that, men happened to, interact with the micro-targeting adverts a lot more than women. Were there any kind of other demographic datas that you managed to see that were striking or, obvious with the political micro-targeting?
So we didn't go too deep into it. One of the things was, yes, we did see slightly higher engagement with male audiences. However, it was not such a significant difference compared to the women. And so we didn't dive too much into it. But that was also influenced by our findings from previous studies, where we saw there was quite a bit of gender balance. And mostly the gender distortion is caused by the engagement, the online engagement of users, where you would find that generally more men using social media, or particularly Facebook, in certain regions compared to others in that particular period. And so that would then explain some of the variation. So we didn't really go deeper into it. What we did try to do is look more into the age demographics, where we found a lot more people were targeted between the ages of 25 and 44. That's where a lot of it was happening. And that's also likely due to, how the recommendation engines of algorithms work, where you could find a lot of young people prefer to engage with more exciting and less political news. And so most likely the lookalike audience algorithm would not really bring that information to them. But we find a lot more people who are above the age of 25 are more interested within politics and what's happening within the country. And so you'd find a lot more of that information actually reaching them. And you could actually see even the impressions from them. They were spending a lot more time on this. And that gap that we saw in terms of impressions, we could see it still perpetuating within the different age groups, where the more targeted information was appealing to them. And for each demographic, there was a bit more twist towards the kind of topics that they were interested in and were being shown. So we did see certain variations within that. So we could see, for example, the go out and vote was a lot more prevalent for the younger people, but then for the slightly older people, a lot more issues of governance was coming up within the targeted ads.
And just finally, were there any other sort of interesting findings that you found when you were going through the data?
One of the things is, we all heard about Cambridge Analytica, right? In fact, one of the things that really motivated me was that, does this actually happen? Like, are there people who are actually doing this? And I believe, like, for me, the most interesting thing was to actually find that, yes, it is there. It's not as popular, but it is there. And to actually see the messages and the crafting and the posters themselves, because most of these ads have images to them. I think that for me was the most intriguing part. And we can see how it would be great to see that trend over time and see how micro-targeting is evolving over time. And to actually also note that data is a very it's core to the people doing the micro targeting, but also for researchers like us who are trying to understand what's the impact. The data is not openly there. For example, yes, you have the Facebook ad library that gives us quite a bit of information, but of course they could do more to bring more transparency. But you could find other platforms such as Twitter, for example, not giving us a lot of information to work with. Actually, a lot of the information is found in Europe and the rest. But it would be great for that information also to be out here for other African countries to see, like, what is happening there. I say this because, for example, I do know in Kenya, Twitter or rather it's called X now, is a very popular platform. So you would expect that there would be a lot more happening in that space. And so if it was actually possible to be able to get that data and really research and find out what's happening there, then it would be great to see how our youth, for example, are being influenced. So just being able to see it actually happening there and then actually finding out that the data is there, but it's limited, I think is one of the very interesting findings that I found, that if we had access to more data, we could dig deeper. And really our goal at the end of it all is tied towards education. We want to educate the masses and let them know that, hey, this is a possibility. Good governance is always an issue. Politicians can come and tell you all the nice things you want to hear, but is it really the case? So if people are more aware that, hey, they're actually just telling me what I want to hear, then they can actually go and criticize and say, okay, yes, he's told me this, but let's look into his or her past and say, do they actually deliver at the end of the day? Because then what happens right now is you find a very good ad and you say, yeah, he's going to build schools, he's going to build roads, he's going to do employment and security. But then they just told you all the things that matter to you so you can go sing their praises. Is there a way that people can find out that, yes, actually, this is just a message because I like these things, but there's a lot more out there?
Okay, so I'm gonna come back to you, Charlene, now. Looking at the data and the results that came out of Joshua and Joseph's algorithm, who were the primary users of this? I'm going to call it a campaign technique, the micro-targeting. Which of the topics were the most important to them? And what are maybe the demographics that were most important to them?
So the short answer is that from what Joseph and Joshua were doing, we could infer that the Democratic Alliance, so the DA, that they used this technique the most. They're also the political party that spent the most on digital political advertising in the lead up to the election. Just to clarify, just because they spent the most on digital political advertising, it doesn't mean that all their ads can be classified as politically micro-targeting ads.
Of course.
The long answer, I want to say that the use of the term infer that I used is quite significant. So our goal wasn't to look at who posted the ads necessarily. It was rather about the prevalence of politically micro-targeted ads in the lead up to the South African elections and then the messaging. So remember, politically micro-targeted ads don't have to be created or run by a political party. But in our case, even though the goal wasn't to look at who posted the ads, we saw that the Democratic Alliance or Democratic Alliance messaging definitely dominated in the lead up to our elections. And what is interesting, though, is that when we look at the keywords that they used throughout their messaging, it was very much focused on voter education. So things like encouraging voter registration, where to register to vote, when is the election date, how to find your voting station. But then we also saw the important issues or themes that arose. And I think you already spoke a bit about governance as an important issue. So in terms of from across the themes that we looked at, governance came out strongly everywhere, but nowhere as strongly as in the Democratic Alliance related ads. So governance and corruption were by far the most significant issues in those ads. Other significant issues that we saw: infrastructure, employment, education. The other popular theme that we saw, which I found really interesting, was related to environmental issues and economic policies, but together. So the political parties that stood out here was the ANC and the Patriotic Alliance, so the PA. And we saw a combination of keywords that relate to mining, solar, energy, jobs, and income. But even if we look at these diverse keywords that they used, the dominant themes that we had were still governance, and then the other themes were getting out to vote and employment.
And obviously, these issues that you mentioned are exceptionally important to young South Africans. And as Joseph mentioned, the age demographic that saw the most sort of engagement with these kind of ads was 25 to 44. And so it's as you said, Joseph, the greater population of people that are interested in politics. Okay, so Charlene, we are lawyers, right? And our primary goal as public interest lawyers, and specifically, is to reform, make change. What does the law say right now? Because it seems to me that these kinds of ads seem like a bit of a violation of the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression, the rights to access of information. So what do we have available to us to challenge being politically micro-targeted?
So you mentioned three very important rights, and those are also enshrined in our Constitution. And I don't really want to talk about those because, they're in the Constitution, they're great, but what are the laws that we have that make them real? So
Sure.
I think many of us, or most South Africans, have likely recently heard about POPIA, the Promotion of Access to Information Act. So that is the most...
Is that why the doctor's constantly asking me to fill out that form?
Yes. So we've been very intense with enforcing on that. So our report I would say, mostly focused on what POPIA can and cannot do for us. So something to just clarify on, like, POPIA applies to public and private information. So it doesn't necessarily say political parties have to do this and independent candidates have to do this. But they have sort of these guidelines that they published on how POPIA would apply in elections to political parties and independent candidates. So in our report, we looked at South Africa's existing legal framework and its shortcomings. Two primary areas stood out here. So the first is in relation to POPIA, so the collection and processing of personal information, and then regulating political advertising in this digital age. So I first just want to speak about POPIA because that's where we're at. So when it comes to political advertising, POPIA says that voters have to consent to their information being collected and to how it's going to be used. And I think this sounds great in theory, but we found that there are exceptions that really undermine this need for consent. So, for example, voters don't have to consent to the collection of their information when the information is available on, like, a publicly available website. So if you published it online, if you have consented to this information being collected by another source, or when the information is part of a public record. And this last one, the information being part of a public record, is important because our personal information, like your name and your address, are recorded in the voter's roll. And the Electoral Act says that information is part of the public record. So this means that political parties and independent candidates can access this information without your consent as a voter for canvassing purposes. So I think it is important for canvassing purposes, but I'm also concerned, like, for the potential for misuse of this information.
Of course, yeah.
And then I also mentioned that we have to consent to how our information is used. So POPIA says that our personal information can only be used for what they call a defined and lawful purpose. And that essentially, in the political context, it means that it has to be for political activities that your information is used. And once that purpose is fulfilled, information has to be destroyed. But what POPIA also says is that personal information can be reused for a new purpose. And that is if the new purpose is compatible with the old purpose, if it's considered to be in the legitimate interest of voters or political parties, or if the information, again, comes from a public source or is in the voter's roll. And yeah, I think the issue here is really that, for me, that these provisions weaken the protections around voter information, and also what does compatible or legitimate use really mean in this context. So turning to regulating political advertising in a digital age, currently we don't have laws that adequately address the potential dangers of political microtargeting. So we have laws that govern traditional broadcasting, but they don't extend to social media platforms. And that's, of course, where political microtargeting occurs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not in the newspaper. And then in terms of election advertising, we have the Electoral Commission, and they do a great job at regulating political advertising to ensure that it is truthful and it is free from hate speech. But the shortcoming here is really that political microtargeting doesn't necessarily involve hate speech or false information.
Yeah.
It's targeted information. So we really find that political advertising at the moment in South Africa operates in this gray area of manipulation or distortion, and tailored ads, even though they might not be false, can mislead voters or undermine our ability to make informed decisions about who to vote for.
I think, the thing that we've been really grappling with at the Legal Resources Centre, and you know this because, like I said, you sit across the hall from me, is that, sort of jurisdiction question that you alluded to. Anytime we try and, get PIA requests, it's the Promotion of Access to Information Act, through their door, they almost always refuse it because they say that they're not incorporated here in South Africa, and therefore we have no rights over them. So PIA has no rights over them, POPIA has no rights over them. And I think that, speaks to the wider issue here with social media in general, And maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but what it seems that is quite obvious is that we need legislative reform. But, besides that, because we're public interest lawyers, which means that we're both lawyers, but we're also activists, what other kinds of recommendations does your report, or do you personally think that, us as the public or the South African government, should do?
So you definitely stole the first one, which is legislative change. Just our laws don't adequately protect, I think at the moment, against, or like the data protection and transparency laws are inadequate. But then you also mentioned this thing where whenever we request information from larger social media companies, that they say our laws don't apply to them. And I think that's really where, for me, we can make a real difference. We didn't really touch on it in our report because the report's recommendations were quite generic because it's early days on how microtargeting operates in South Africa. Does it happen here? But I think we really need to be creative around how we encourage accountability for social media companies in South Africa. So I can tell you a bit about some developments that we've seen there. So at the start of 2024, we have the Campaign for Free Expression. So that's not us, but they filed a formal request for information to Meta and other major social media companies on measures to protect election integrity in South Africa. And despite having offices and staff in South Africa, Meta claimed that the law doesn't apply to them. Meta is the only people who responded, I think. And I mean, you mentioned that. They say the law doesn't apply to them. Their headquarters are not based in South Africa. And the other important thing is they said that the data that the Campaign for Free Expression want, that's not stored locally. And then what happened, which was very significant, is, the first part of approaching the information regulator, that's not the significant part, but so the Campaign for Free Expression approached South Africa's information regulator, and they confirmed that the Campaign for Free Expression actually had a right to the information that they requested from Meta. And at the moment, the regulator is investigating what information Meta actually has to disclose, and we're still waiting for the ruling. So I think that's a very important step because if we can build an evidence base of these types of requests, they're being refused, we take it to the information regulator, we could potentially build either a case or just public discourse and motivation for keeping ad tech companies accountable so that we don't see what's happening in, for example, the US during elections.
Yeah.
I think South Africa, as I said, it's early days. We do see micro-targeting in South Africa, political micro-targeting, but it's not at the same scale.
Okay.
And I think these types of changes are really important on how we go forward with this.
Joseph, I'm just going to bring it to you before we end. Charlene's mentioned legislative reform, other kinds of ways that we can, make changes in the South African space. You've done 2 other reports before the South African one. You spoke about the Kenyan report and the Nigerian report. What other kind of recommendations from the variety of investigations that you've done so far could you give us?
I think going back to civic education, it's very important that the masses are educated on the possibilities that are out there. Not so much so that they can go deeper into it or interrogate it or name calling, but so that they are able to, at the end of the day, be aware and make more informed decisions, not decisions that have been basically psychological warfare has happened and they've been coerced into it unknowingly, right? I would say that's a major one. And also just to also respect the privacy of people at the end of the day, from the political side. I know that that's a bit of a long shot, because everyone is out there trying to get their message out there. So I'd still champion for education, but also for education, for those who are doing it to understand what impact it could have, because it's not just, them who are doing it. We've had instances where countries have claimed that there are external parties influencing the political discourse within a country. So you can imagine, yes, we are looking at the internal politics and we're saying, hey, it's this person or this person running for presidency. But what if other governments are coming to influence the way we run our countries? How does that then interfere with what we're trying to do? So being able to educate the masses on such things, I think is a very important thing to do. Yeah.
Guys, Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited by this report. I think it's a great start into sort of holding social media companies to account, but also just, creating education for the general public about what's going on online and what other kinds of uses their data can, give people like political parties or political campaigners. And I think we have brilliant people on the case. I'm looking at the two of you. And hopefully I can, contribute in some way other than this podcast. But
I know where to find you across the hall.
Thank you so much for joining me. That's a wrap.
Thank you for tuning in to Legal Resources Radio. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and gained some valuable insights. If you did, or even if you didn't, please remember to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Legal Resources SA, or visit our website at lrc.org.za for updates and exclusive content on the incredible work our team is doing. We'll see you on the next episode of Legal Resources Radio. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep up the good fight.